So this is the 16 Pro Max and this is the 16 Pro. And in this episode, I'm going to share with you my 6-month experience with each to help you decide if these are still some of the phones that you might want to consider deciding between the 16 Pro Max and the 16 Pro. So what is up, guys? Nick here, helping you to master your technology, and let's begin by talking about the price. The iPhone 16 Pro Max is going to run you $1199, and this one over here on the right, the smaller 16 Pro, is going to run you $999. So there's been a $200 difference, and I do think the $200 is worth it on the 16 Pro Max, mostly for the battery life. We'll talk more about that later. But yeah, just from a price to value perspective, if you're paying $1,000 already for the 16 Pro, I feel like why not just go to the 16 Pro Max since they're already both over $1,000. I understand this one is like $200 more, but you know, you are paying $1,000 for a 6.1 inch. It's kind of a high price for this size of a phone, in my opinion. But definitely, I do find that the real reason is not really the size. The real reason that the 16 Pro Max to me took the cake in terms of price for value is the battery life. It's like the best on a flagship phone, or one of the best out there on a flagship phone. So 6 months later, when it comes to their builds, well, they both have the same build. They both have this titanium frame, and it looks very clean. The back is very clean as well. No longer seeing a bunch of fingerprints. You still get that on the displays, of course, as they're glass, but overall, they felt pretty great. They do have the action buttons on the left right there. We also have camera control buttons on the right, which I've actually been using quite a bit. The more I use it, the more I'm starting to like it. I don't really use it much for those sliding features that they have to slide through different exposures and zooming effects, but I've been really using it as just a quick shutter key. It's kind of in a good location. It's kind of like where you would expect the camera to be, and then you can just go ahead and click in there. Also, some cases do offer camera control integration, so that also works well with those. Might even make it a little bit more responsive depending on if that case is a good case. But I have dropped this like one time since owning it, and I do have a very tiny nick on the corner somewhere. It's so small, it's very tough to find it. I think it's like right there. Yeah, very, very small nicks there on the corner. But this thing hits cement, and that's all it did. So this thing is pretty darn durable. Nearly invisible there on this one. This probably would have been more noticeable if I would have got the darker color. It did irritate me at first because this is a really high price phone, and you're probably wondering, well, why didn't you have a case on it? I actually didn't have a case on it for this one moment because the case was interfering with like the cable I was charging with. I took it off and it slipped out of my pocket at the perfect time and hit the cement, but it's okay. It gives us some content to talk about. Over here, this one did not really get any damage. I've been having this in the case, never took it out. But definitely, I do like the size of the 16 Pro for comfort. I just don't like the price because it has a smaller battery, a smaller footprint, and I'm still paying big phone prices for this phone. That's the one thing I don't like. But 199 grams, it's still a bit weighty on this one. I've always felt like over these past 6 months that I rather hold the regular 16 or even this new 16E by comparison, just because this 16 Pro just feels pretty weighty for the size. So this phone just absolutely looks really low end by comparison to the 16 Pro, but it feels very similar on the back texture, but also much lighter. So if you are looking for a light option, the 16 Pro is lighter than the Max, but it's no light phone. There's some phones in the Android space that are as large as the 16 Pro Max, but lighter than the 16 Pro. So that should tell you something right there. Both of these don't have SIM card support. They only have eSIM also. So that's something that you're not going to see on the body. I also like how there's no 5G antenna on these phones. They're kind of integrated into the frame, so they're pretty clean all around. I don't really like how thick the camera bumps are. I haven't liked that for years. And also, I think this design is starting to get old. The triple camera in the rear, it's been there since the 11 Pro Max. But honestly, over this past 6 months, I've been thinking a lot about the 11 Pro and Pro Max. I feel like this is that type of year where they have like similar cameras, both good battery life, both good options. This is kind of like a modern version of the 11 Pro Max and 11 Pro year, which was a great year for iPhones. Moving on to displays, one of the things I do have to say I've been pretty impressed with is the minimal bezels. I still continue to love this display because of this. When I look at some other phones, it's pretty noticeable going back. This one over here also does have pretty thin bezels, and you also notice this when you look at the new 16E, you look at even the base 16, these minimal bezels are quite nice. As a matter of fact, I can't wait till it's an all-screen iPhone. We're not quite there yet, but I do see a future where Dynamic Island is completely gone and the entire phone is a full screen. I do think this is going to happen eventually once the tech is available, but maybe we'll see foldables before that occurs. But also, both of the displays do get very bright outdoors, pretty easy to see. They're not the brightest displays out there anymore. They're also not the sharpest up close. 460 ppi, Apple's been sticking with this for a long time, but they're both 1959, so even on the smaller phone, you do have enough width to see plenty of content. And both of them are always on display, which is a feature I don't really use too much on this phone because I feel like it's not as customizable or useful as like always on displays on Android phones. Also, I don't really like draining any type of battery, so I don't really use it, but it is there if you want to use it. They both also have high brightness modes, and they're both HDR10, 120 Hertz. So that's good. ProMotion. That's what we want to see for sure. Both of them are very smooth as well. So if I had to pick one though, the Max is getting it because it's all this glory full screen. I feel like on the bigger Max, you don't really pay attention to Dynamic Island as much as on the smaller phone. And so for me, the Max is going to be the winner when it comes to display, just much larger. It does have a little bit higher pixels as well, even though it comes at the same density because it needs to be at this size. Generally, this just feels more impressive when you look at the Max display versus the Base Pro, but the Base Pro is still very good. So they really nailed it with the displays this year. I just want to see, and also the color accuracy, I should talk about that as well, because the actual tuning and the whites and the colors are really good. They're not oversaturated, undersaturated. The colors don't look weird. They're some of the best out there. But this right here is still in the way. It still doesn't look super pretty in my opinion, but some people do like how it looks like an iPhone. Like everybody knows if you have Dynamic Island, you have an iPhone, but that's a different topic altogether. So when it comes to performance, both of them have been really fast with this latest Apple A18 Pro chip. 8 gigabytes of RAM. They've been stunning performance. I do want to see both of them increase to 12 gigs of RAM in the future. I do feel like because all the competitors are putting that, Apple just feels behind with their 8 gigabytes of RAM. I understand even in the Windows space and the Mac space that even with those M series chips with 8 gigs of RAM, they were still smoking a lot of the Windows laptops with double the RAM. That could be said as well in the phone game as well, that these phones are kind of doing the same thing. Even with 8 gigs of RAM, they're still faster than a lot of Android competitors with 16 gigs of RAM. And that is true mostly due to the powerful CPU, 3nm chip in here. These also do have 6-core Apple GPUs, so they're really good in the gaming department as well. So if you are looking for good gaming experience, it's here. Also, these have better cooling, so they don't get as hot during gaming as the 15 Pro series. However, I found them to still warm up quite a bit under heavier games like Call of Duty, GTA, San Andreas, things that are a little bit more pushing the CPU. I found the 16 Pro Max in the back top to still get a little bit warm. So I would use a case if you're doing heavy extended sessions on gaming, but overall, they're still much improved performers over the iPhone 15 Pro in the area of heat management. So that's a good thing. On the whole, I love the performance. I do think that iOS's animations and the way it navigates along the software is a little bit slower than some of the competitors these days. So I would like to see Apple improve the speed of the software while continuing to retain that very good polish and smooth experience that they're known for. So I am really excited to see where they go with iOS 19. And so that brings me on the software. I'm not going to talk too long about this. iOS 18 has been updated pretty regularly, as you would expect. We do have customizable icons, different widgets than before. So you basically just have similar experience with more customization than ever before. I do like how you can place icons wherever you want. It's a nice touch for the iPhone. But overall, the core experience still hasn't changed too much. So I do feel like with iOS 19, we're going to see massive changes. These phones aren't really different from other iPhones besides the fact that if you go into the settings menu, you are going to have more experience with the camera, like more features that you can play with the camera. You also do have Apple Intelligence on both of these, which is really good, both in beta though. But you also have customizable action buttons. So these are where these separate themselves from more base iPhones. But now the base 16E also has most of this feature set. So really it's going to be the camera control button here on both of these, which you can also use for visual intelligence. So if you just continue to hold it, you can use this for visual intelligence. iPhone 16E will put that into the control center via a software button. But the camera control is something different. You swipe through here. You can go ahead and change different features on there. So that's basically where the software kind of integrates better with that hardware on these phones versus other iPhones. But other than that, core experience is the same, pretty polished, apps work well, and we get updated regularly. Again, animations just feel a little bit slow sometimes to me, but some people like that relaxed look. It can be looking pretty polished and smooth, and sometimes we don't need to be blazing fast through everything in the software. But yeah, the ecosystem's strong. The Apple Watch Ultra, the Apple Watch, the iPads, the Macs, you know the drill. It's just one of the best out there for connecting all these devices together. Really from a storage perspective, I do think the 16 Pro is the better deal because you're going to get this phone with more storage for the same price as like the entry storages on the iPhone 16 Pro Max. Now, both of these are overcharging, I feel like, for storage. We don't get many discounts and deals on that area. But you can actually get a 16 Pro with double the storage as the base 16 Pro for the price of the starting 16 Pro Max. So if storage and price is your deal, you probably want the 16 Pro if like you're like don't want to pay more for storage, because if you top out the 16 Pro Max, it really does tend to get up there in the price. So do keep that in mind. Like 16 Pro Max right here, Desert Titanium we're looking at here. We're looking at $1599 with the 1 terabyte. I mean, that is higher than MacBooks right there. So this phone is up there when you start topping out the storage. This one also will come up there, but not quite as much as this one right here. So storage value, this one's better, but both of them are the same NVMe, so they're going to transfer about the same. And both these do have display ports via their USB-C, so you can kind of plug these in the monitors. It'll display up the screen, and they also connect with Mac with that feature where you can see the iPhone screen on the Mac now. So it's all good on both of them. USB-C is pretty decent here, although this is not going to be faster than some of the Android phones out there, but it's still good to have USB-C. When it comes to the cameras, there's not really much to say here. I will say both of them have the same exact experience. They have the same camera setup, which is great. But one of the things I like the most is the camera control button. I'm getting used to. I'm starting to like it. Honestly, at first I thought it was gimmicky, but I'm getting used to it. And one of the things I've been noticing that I really like about the iPhone is the shutter speed is very fast. It's one of the best, honestly. In addition, having these different lenses is nice. Going to 25 times on the base Pro is also nice. And the ease of use is still here for iPhone. There is still, there's camera phones now that are giving you similarly easy to use. This one, you still have to go into settings to tweak certain Pro settings. But most of what you want to do is right here within the camera. And I really still like the video. It's really a reliable performer with audio mixing features, with AI in the background where you could change the audio, so you can kind of like fix wind noise and stuff like that with this phone. You also have cinematic video. The 4K 120 is pretty strong stuff right here. If you want to do some really slow motion stuff, really good. So, I mean, it's really a pro setup. But again, it's just like all the other pros. If you're not taking advantage of those extra abilities, it might not be worth it. But for some people, just generally having the versatility of zooming, the fast shutter speed, the camera control button, I feel like they found a good balance between offering a great camera setup for pros and for regular consumers. So it's just excellent. I really love these cameras. It's just exciting to see where they go next. Both of them do really good, and competitors are still like beating them in certain areas for sure, like with sensors being a little bit sharper, higher, megapixel counts, further zoom reaches. But as a total package, these cameras still nail it. I would say they're kind of like the Pixel. Like the Pixel is kind of like the iPhone equivalent, I would say, on Android phones. These are pretty great setups right here. Now I want to discuss battery a bit, because battery is where the iPhone 16 Pro Max takes a massive leap over the iPhone 16 Pro. And it really is an area that I have to say that I'm going to have to pick this 9 times out of 10. I use this phone super heavy and I just cannot drain this battery in a day. I can't. I always go to the next day with well over 40%. I haven't charged this since yesterday early. So this phone is just ridiculous. 4685 doesn't seem like a lot on paper, and there are Android phones that are doing 5,000, 5,500. But compared to this 3582 on the 16 Pro, this feels like a good battery life on the 16 Pro most of the day, all day. But I'm charging at night. This one, I'm like, whoa, how do I still have 50% the next morning? That's pretty amazing. Also, if you're a light user, you're going 2 days pretty easily on this phone. These phones don't impress in charging though. They're pretty slow to wireless charge at only 15 watts. And their fastest wire charging is going to do about 50% in 30 minutes, which is not insanely quick. You're probably going to have to wait like an hour or two to fully charge these phones, maybe even more than an hour for sure. These are not the fastest charging phones out there. Although they are USB-C, the competition, many phones are much quicker to charge than these phones. So that's an area where Apple can improve. But you can do MagSafe charging, which is pretty cool. And you don't even need a case to do that on these phones. Some extra features to talk about. Audio is pretty close on both, with the 16 Pro Max being a little bit louder. Both of them do have Wi-Fi 7. They do have, some of the latest connectivity standards. But I want to wrap it up here by kind of giving you my thoughts on which one has been a better experience 6 months later. I feel like the Pro has the more comfortable design, but I feel like it's a little bit much in the price tag for the weaker battery compared to the 16 Pro Max. So for me, the 16 Pro Max has been the better option. I get more screen, which is, I'm not going to lie, a little bit harder to handle compared to that, but it's a good trade-off for the bigger battery life and the more enjoyable space to read things. However, if you have small hands, this is going to be a reach. But I feel like people who have small hands also might find this a bit heavy, and because it just feels like dense. Like it's small, but it feels dense. It's still a great option for those of you who don't love large phones, but both of these are pretty large. If you don't compare this to this, it still feels like kind of a big phone on the 16 Pro. At the end of the day, though, I think the 16 Pro Max is the winner. Just bigger screen, better battery life, and overall, it feels like the more top of the line between these two, although this one is still very good. So let me know your thoughts on that down below. What you think. Did you buy a 16 Pro? Did you buy a 16 Pro Max? Do you plan on buying one? And I do want to give a conclusion about what I feel about this compared to the competition right now. I feel like it's still holding up pretty well compared to the competition. These phones are coming out that compete with this and are beating it, like S25 Ultra in multiple areas, the 15 Ultra from Xiaomi, the OnePlus 13. These phones are doing things better than these devices, but they don't do, I would say, ecosystem better, the software integration better, the software updates regularly. These are still the best out there for that. Also, I would argue the cameras in certain areas still tend to outperform those, and the battery life is more consistent on the 16 Pro Max than I've seen on some competitors. So that's why I still continue to have usage here on these. And also, iMessage is pretty great, FaceTime, those kind of things. If your friends and family are using those kind of things, that's hard to break from. That's something to note as well. Thumbs up if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know your thoughts on these two down below. Which one would you pick? Did you pick one? Did you have one? Did you trade the other one? Like, did you have the 16 Pro Max, go to the 16 Pro, or 16 Pro went to the Max? I'm interested to know your experience. So drop it down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Have a great weekend. Nick here. Be sure to be well, and peace.